Microsoft's making changes to the Xbox DRM, but why now? Many moons ago, when the Xbox One launched, there was a little bit of a PR fiasco. And no, my friends, I'm not referring to the TV situation, which we're all familiar with. I'm referring to the Xbox One requiring online connectivity. Now, Don Matrix at the time had a terrible response because somebody said, what if I were to play my Xbox on a submarine? Referring to sailors, and they said, we have a great console for you. It's called the Xbox 360, and that is not how he should have responded, and that really just continued the downward spiral of the Xbox One launch. It didn't go well. Well, today, or I should say this week, we're getting some more information that Microsoft is making changes to the Xbox One specific DRM. But really, the question becomes, why is Microsoft doing this now? And we'll get into that in a second, because I've got to, put your tinfoil hat on conspiracy about why they might be making that change. But either way, what the actual news here is that starting with Xbox Build 2206, Microsoft is making it easier to play Xbox One games that had online connectivity locally, meaning if you have a disc for an Xbox One game and you put it in your drive and you don't have internet connectivity, there is now a much better chance that you'll be able to play that game. But there are a lot of caveats around this. First of all, the biggest one being if you have a Series S or X disc, it doesn't look like this change is going to impact you a lot. What it really boils down to is if your game can play holistically from that disc, there's a good chance you'll now be able to play it without internet connectivity, especially, and I mean primarily, Xbox One related content. Now, if it's a cross-gen disc, the chances are actually still pretty good. But if it's a Series S or X disc, there's a better than good chance it may not, because it might actually have to go out and grab the rest of the bits to download. Many people aren't aware that if you buy a disc-based game, really what you're buying, especially today, is really just an entitlement to play that game or a license. And when you put the disc in, it's going to go download that day one update, but it's also downloading a lot more connectivity and related functions on the back end as well to enable that disc. It's a DRM related stuff. But either way, then what you need to know here is that if you have an Xbox One disc, there's a good chance that this DRM update is going to impact you in a very positive way. This is also really good for historical purposes, meaning if you have an old title and 10 years from now you want to play it, there's a good chance it might actually work. So these are the changes that are coming out. TLDR, Xbox One discs more than likely can now play without internet connectivity, and maybe that's how it should have been all along, and Don Matrix really shouldn't have ever mentioned some of that forced online connectivity. That being said, why is Microsoft making this change seemingly randomly in the middle of, the fall of 2022? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, they claim their official reasoning is that they looked at the telemetry and the data and said, look, it's just not really needed anymore, or it was never really needed. We don't have the full clarity, but it's not needed. So that's what they're coming out and saying. There's another option too. It's like, hey, Xbox One is now in its sunset phase. They're not selling the console anymore. The numbers of new sales should be zero unless there's any stuck on store shelves somewhere. And so at this point, it's like, hey, that risk assessment of those discs leaking or being exposed to the internet or something like that is now dramatically shrinking, and all focuses on the Series S and X, I should say, and we can now reduce the impact we have from Xbox One discs, pinging our servers. That is one theory that very logically could be it, and that may be the entire story. On the other hand, my friends, if you have some tinfoil, crumple it up into a boat shape and put it on your head, because here's my conspiracy theory that just kind of lines up to some things. This week, information leaked out that Sony is preparing to ship, a PlayStation 5 with an external disk drive starting next year. Meaning, what they're going to do is they're only going to have one SKU of the PS5, and then you'll be able to plug in an external drive and use your discs with it that way. And so that's what Sony's planning to do. Now, we already know that Microsoft ships the Xbox Series S without a disk drive, and it makes logical sense that at some point they might do the Series X without a disk drive, right? I mean, that makes sense, and that will help them lower the price, and then they can sell that console at a lower price. Hey, but if you're going to do that, Microsoft is still selling disc-based games, and if they're going to do that, they're going to need an external drive just like Sony would. And if they're going to need an external drive, that means they have to review the DRM associated with discs, and they got to make decisions based on how they're going to support that. the timing feels right that Microsoft's like, we got to look at this disk-based stuff because we're going to ship this drive. It's a new exposure point for us. So let's remodel the DRM, make sure it works. And so that's might be why we're starting to see some changes, is that Microsoft sees the horizon where they're going to have to ship an external drive, not the HD DVD like they did with the Xbox 360. And there you go. That is my conspiracy theory about why Microsoft might be making this change now. It's a good faith change, and I'm happy that they are doing it, and I could be completely wrong. But it just kind of lines up that Microsoft is looking at how console sales are going, where people are buying games, and I would imagine most people are buying digital games these days. Now, granted, people are absolutely still buying the disc-based games. That is still a thing. There's especially like the collector's editions. There's that nostalgia feeling, although you don't get the big pamphlets like you used to anymore. Either way, there's still a retail market for the disc-based games. That being said, I think they're saying like, look, if we pull the drive out, what could we sell a Series X for without the drive? If they can lower it by another $20 to $30, that is sizable. Now, granted, we all know a disk drive itself is not $20 to $30, especially at mass volume like Microsoft is paying. But when you look at the factors of like having to put that in the machine, having to have somebody connect it, having to test it, it does add up. And so Microsoft could realistically be trying to find additional ways to just lower those price points, and removing the disk drive makes a lot of sense. But they can't abandon the market because that is a narrative Microsoft does not want to have, right? They don't want to come out and people saying Microsoft is officially killing disc-based games. Not to mention they need their partners to help them. Companies like GameStop and companies like Best Buy need disc-based sales, and so Microsoft can't just kick their partners on the way out the door to this migration, even though we all know it's sort of coming. So that being said, then the other question then is like, let's say they do come out with an external drive. What happens to the Series S? Would it support it? Does it need a new connector? Does it need additional security on that connector? These are questions that we don't quite know. And Microsoft is very sensitive because now that they put the disk-based drive out in the real world, like, well, not in the real world, but disconnected, that means there's only a single cable. It means it is way easier for somebody to try to hack and manipulate these game data is good English, right? The game data, and eventually, expose the Series S and X to homebrewing or just quite literally stealing of games. And that is absolutely something Microsoft does not want, even though the Xbox Media Center from back in the day was one of the greatest platforms to ever exist in the world of home media consoles. Had a lot of fun with that one, but here we are, and Microsoft has sort of moved away from that, and so has the industry, let's be honest. Although Plex servers are still very, very big, but slightly different than homebrewing your own Xbox console into a home media device. So there we go, guys. If Microsoft does remove the drive from the Series X, I'm curious what you think they would sell it for. I bet they can probably eventually chop $50 off the pricing. At this point, 2 years in, volume, scale, disk drives, they might be able to do it, and maybe that's the direction that Microsoft is heading. So there you go. That's the DRM update. We will see what else Microsoft has up its sleeve in the next couple of months here. We are heading into the holiday shopping season, which is where Microsoft loves to announce big things. And so as always, make sure to keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this channel is me.